86th minute. The game was drifting toward a draw, both teams running on fumes. And then, out of almost nowhere, a tall Norwegian striker appeared in exactly the right spot, not sprinting, not fighting for the ball, just there, like he'd known the exact second and the exact yard this chance would arrive. One touch, goal. Norway 2, Ivory Coast 1. It was the third straight World Cup match Erling Haaland had scored in, making him only the third player in the tournament's history to do that. Next up, Brazil in the round of 16. And the strange part is, if you watch that goal closely, you'll notice he barely moved all game. He didn't need to. 2,500 years earlier, a military strategist in ancient China wrote the exact philosophy for what you just watched, and warned that almost nobody would understand it until they saw it happen right in front of them. Sometime around the 6th century BC, during one of the most violent periods in Chinese history, a stretch later called the Warring States period, when regional lords fought endless, exhausting wars for territory, a strategist believed to be named Sun Tzu wrote a text that would outlast every empire it was written for. It was called The Art of War, and its central idea broke almost everything people assumed about winning. Sun Tzu didn't glorify the bloodiest battle or the bravest charge. He said the opposite. He wrote that the supreme form of victory is to defeat the enemy without ever having to fight them at all, to win through position, timing, and patience so completely that the outcome is decided before the first blow lands. War, to Sun Tzu, was not about strength. It was about not wasting it. He wrote that a skilled commander conserves his forces, that the greatest fighters in history don't look impressive in the moment of victory, because by the time they strike, the enemy has already lost without knowing it. He compared the ideal warrior to water, something that finds the gap, follows the shape of the ground, wastes no motion, and yet, over time, wears down anything in its path. Every unnecessary movement, every battle fought for pride instead of purpose, was in Sun Tzu's eyes a kind of failure, even if you won. The real skill was invisible. It looked, to an untrained eye, like doing almost nothing. Erling Haaland was born in Leeds, England, in the summer of 2000, while his father, Erling Haaland, was playing professional football there. 3 years later, the family moved back to Brine, a small town on the Norwegian coast. Erling's mother, Gry Marita Braut, wasn't just a supportive parent on the sidelines. She was a national heptathlon champion, an elite athlete in her own right, someone who had built a career out of precision, timing, and the science of the human body under pressure. That inheritance mattered. At 5 years old, Erling reportedly set a world record for his age group in the standing long jump. Not football, distance. Explosive single motion power, the physical language he would speak for the rest of his life. But the more important inheritance wasn't physical. It was a warning, and it came from tragedy. Erling Haaland had a respectable professional career. Nottingham Forest, Leeds United, Manchester City. And then, in 2001, during a Manchester derby, he was the target of one of the most notorious tackles in the history of the sport, a challenge widely reported as deliberate retaliation for an incident years earlier. Erling's knee never recovered. By 2003, his career was over, ended not gradually but violently in a single moment on a football pitch. Erling grew up in the shadow of that story, a father whose career had been destroyed not by lack of talent, but by a moment of unnecessary violent engagement he never even chose to have. If Sun Tzu had a nightmare version of what happens when you're pulled into someone else's fight, it was written into Erling Haaland's own family history before he'd kicked a ball professionally. And maybe that's why what Haaland became looks the way it does. Football analysts have spent years trying to describe his game, and they keep landing on the same words: efficient, clinical, economical. He doesn't dribble past 5 defenders. He barely runs compared to strikers half his size. Coaches and analysts have pointed out something almost eerie, that for long stretches of a match, Haaland disappears. He drifts out of the defender's line of sight, conserves his energy, refuses to engage in fights for the ball he doesn't need to win. And then, for 2 or 3 seconds, he strikes, and the game is over before the defense understands what happened. That is not an accident of biology. That is, whether he has ever read a word of the text or not, Sun Tzu's entire philosophy of war translated into a human body. Win the position before you throw the punch. Make the outcome inevitable before anyone sees you move. The results speak in a language even people who don't follow football can read. He arrived at Borussia Dortmund as a teenager and scored an astonishing rate of goals per minute played, not through volume of chances, but through precision. Manchester City paid a fortune to bring him to the Premier League, and he broke the record for goals in a single season faster than anyone in the competition's history. Every transfer, every record tells the same story. This is not a player who tries the most. He is a player who wastes the least. But economy of motion comes at a cost. And it's a cost Sun Tzu understood too. A general who refuses to fight for spectacle is often accused of cowardice by people who don't understand strategy. And Haaland has faced a version of that his entire career. Critics call his game robotic, mechanical. They say he doesn't create, doesn't dazzle, doesn't do the things that make highlight reels feel human. For a sport that worships flair, the dribble, the nutmeg, the impossible turn, a player who wins by disappearing and reappearing at exactly the right second can look, to the untrained eye, almost boring. That's the same trap the flashiest generals in history fell into when they mocked the quiet strategist who let his enemies exhaust themselves first. Sun Tzu warned about this specifically. The greatest victories often look from the outside like nothing happened at all. There's a line attributed to Sun Tzu that might be the most famous sentence ever written about competition. Know the enemy and know yourself, and in 100 battles, you will never be in danger. Most footballers study opponents. Fewer study themselves with that same brutal honesty. Haaland, by every account from the people who've coached him, has an unusually clear sense of exactly what kind of player he is. And, just as importantly, what kind of player he refuses to pretend to be. He does not try to be Messi. He does not try to dazzle. He has built his entire career around a ruthless, almost uncomfortable self-knowledge. I am not the artist. I am the blade. Use me accordingly. Which makes this exact tournament the most Sun Tzu chapter of his career so far. Norway had not reached a World Cup in 28 years. Since 1998, a generation of players grew up without ever seeing their country on this stage. Qualifying should have been a grind. Instead, Norway went through it unbeaten, and Haaland scored 16 goals in just 8 matches, nearly double the next best scorer in the entire qualifying tournament, including 2 goals in 2 minutes in the final match, in Milan against Italy. That is not just talent. That is a campaign fought and effectively decided long before the actual war, the World Cup itself, even began. Sun Tzu again. The skilled commander subdues the enemy's forces without engaging them in battle. Norway's opponents in qualifying were, in a very real sense, defeated before the whistle blew. But Sun Tzu also left a warning buried in his philosophy, and it applies here too. He wrote that no strategy survives contact with arrogance, that the commander who begins to believe his own reputation, who stops reading the terrain and starts assuming victory, is the one who gets ambushed. Haaland is still only 25. He has not yet lifted a World Cup. He has not yet faced a defense as complete, as disciplined as Brazil's, the exact kind of opponent that punishes a striker who relies on economy rather than improvisation when the position simply isn't there to exploit. Every ghost eventually meets a wall he can't drift past. Sun Tzu never promised invincibility. He promised advantage, and advantage has to be earned again, every single time, against every new opponent. And maybe that's the quietest part of this story. A father whose career ended in one violent, chaotic, unnecessary moment. A son who built his entire game around never letting that happen to him. Around control, positioning, patience, precision. Around making sure that when the moment of danger comes, he is never caught out of position, never dragged into someone else's fight. Whether Erling Haaland ever consciously built his philosophy that way or simply absorbed it by watching what happened to his father, the result is the same. He plays like a man who understood, before he could even explain why, that the fight you don't have to have is always the safest one to win. Sun Tzu wrote his philosophy for generals commanding armies, 25 centuries before anyone imagined a game played by 22 men and a ball. He couldn't have known a Norwegian striker would one day stand almost still for 85 minutes, reading the terrain, wasting nothing, and then, in a single motion, end the war. Haaland is what Sun Tzu warned us about: the danger of judging a warrior by how hard he fights, instead of by how rarely he has to. Norway waited 28 years to return to this stage. Now they face Brazil. And somewhere on that pitch, a quiet, economical, terrifyingly patient young man will be doing what he has always done, disappearing until the exact moment he can't be stopped.